When a billionaire mocked a delivery girl for being late, he didn't know she would become the woman who would rewrite his legacy. New York City never truly sleeps, but it does hum at a different frequency at 6:15 a.m. The streets of Midtown still glistened from last night's rain, and a brisk wind curled around the base of Sterling Holdings Tower like a silk ribbon. On the 47th floor, the lights were already on. The future, it seemed, waited for no one. David Sterling stood at the head of a long glass conference table, wearing a navy wool suit sharp enough to slice through the tension in the room. 12 department heads sat silently, some cradling tablets, others clutching their caffeine like life support. The quarterly partnership meeting was off to a disastrous start. "This is unacceptable," David said, his voice low but edged with steel. "We're negotiating an 8-figure logistics contract with Shenzhen Connect, and the Mandarin translation reads like a Google search gone wrong." His assistant, Logan Reed, shifted uncomfortably. The legal liaison, a man with 4 Ivy League degrees, paled visibly. The digital copy of the contract was projected behind David on a 90-inch screen, where a highlighted paragraph blinked like a warning light. David turned toward the espresso machine tucked discreetly into the corner of the conference suite. He pressed the call button beside it. "I asked for a double ristretto 10 minutes ago. Do I need to run the machine myself?" Downstairs in the ground-level cafe of Sterling Tower, Emily Carter was already halfway up the service elevator, 2 coffees in a tray, her messenger bag slung across her shoulder like a shield. The barista shift wasn't her dream job, nor was it her third that week, but it paid just enough to cover part of her mother's medical expenses. She exhaled as the elevator halted on 47. Her name tag read Emily in slightly smudged ink, and her curls were tucked under a knit cap, still damp from the misty morning. The door to the suite clicked open, and 12 pairs of eyes followed her as she walked in. David didn't glance at her as he spoke to the room. "This, right here, is the clause that's going to sink the entire agreement if we don't catch it before it hits legal review in Beijing." Emily placed the espresso in front of him, the second coffee on the tray still steaming. He glanced at her for the first time, really looked, and narrowed his eyes. "You're bilingual, right? I've heard you speak Spanish downstairs." Emily straightened. "Yes, and I speak Italian, French, and conversational Mandarin." That drew a few surprised glances from the table. David raised a brow, intrigued but still clipped. "You read this?" He gestured toward the paragraph in question. The translation was an economic minefield. Phrases like guaranteed yield chain and transfer of indemnity twisted beyond meaning. It was the kind of language that buries companies in litigation. Emily adjusted her bag on her shoulder. She stepped closer to the screen and read it aloud, first in Mandarin, clear, confident, tonal precision, and then in English. "This says that in the event of unforeseen customs delay, the party assuming risk will forfeit advance interest guarantees, which is not what your English version claims. That's a critical shift in liability." The room fell utterly silent. David blinked. Twice. Logan leaned forward, murmuring, "She's right. That clause flips the indemnity on our end." David slowly turned back to Emily. "What's your name?" "Emily Carter." "Do you work in legal?" She shook her head. "No, I work downstairs, and part-time at the Brooklyn Public Library. I freelance translate grant proposals for small nonprofits." David crossed his arms. "So, not a lawyer, not a consultant, but you caught what my legal team didn't?" "Yes," Emily said evenly, "because it's not about the degree. It's about the language." She turned to leave, but David wasn't finished. What would you do differently if you were me? Emily paused at the door. She looked back at him, eyes steady. I'd stop assuming the smartest person in the room is always the one sitting at the head of the table. And with that, she walked out. Outside, the morning had become bolder. The city was waking in full. Emily stood under the overhang of the building, the wind picking up her curls like they had something to say. She didn't see the man in the conference room lower his espresso, untouched. She didn't know he'd spend the next 2 hours staring at the claws she exposed, and the next 2 days replaying her voice in his mind. But she would soon. Because the coffee wasn't the only thing he'd remember. It was the moment she rewrote the room. And David Sterling, the man who thought he built his company on precision, had just met someone with an even sharper lens. Not in a courtroom, not on a resume, but on the 47th floor, holding a paper cup. The apartment at 306 Crown Street, Brooklyn, wasn't much. Just 4 thin walls stitched together by decades of water stains and forgotten promises. On the 3rd floor, in Unit 3C, the windows rattled whenever the Q train passed by. But the walls were lined with books. Hundreds of them. Second-hand, dog-eared, spine-creased lives waiting to be reread. Emily Carter unlocked the door with one hand and balanced a paper bag of groceries in the other. The smell of eucalyptus and Vicks Vapor Rub hit her instantly. Her mother, Donna, sat upright in the worn recliner by the window, a nebulizer mask humming faintly over her nose and mouth. "Morning, Ma," Emily whispered, careful not to wake her if she was drifting. Donna lifted one hand, waved. Her eyes, sharp, brown, and full of unsaid things, followed her daughter. Emily unpacked the bag quickly. Lentils, bananas, generic cold medicine, and a half-priced poetry collection from the thrift store next to the bodega. She placed the book on the nightstand. "Another one?" Donna rasped, her voice hoarse from both illness and laughter. "You're running out of space." "I'll start shelving them in the bathroom. No one will notice," Emily teased, gently adjusting her mother's blanket. Donna looked at her daughter like she was looking backward through time, trying to find the baby she used to hold in this same apartment, in a crib beside the same cracked wall. "You're tired. I see it." Emily gave a half smile. "Brooklyn's not the kind of place that lets you sleep in." The truth was, Emily hadn't slept more than 4 hours in weeks. After her barista shift ended, she rode the subway to the public library near Flatbush, where she volunteered as a language assistant for immigrant families. On weekends, she proofread grant proposals for nonprofits in exchange for grocery vouchers, all while managing medication schedules, insurance forms, and rent payments that never got any smaller. Donna removed the mask and patted the seat next to her. Emily sat. "You're wasting your mind," her mother said, not unkindly. "You should be finishing that degree, writing books, not shelving them." "I will, someday. You always say that, and I always mean it." A long silence settled between them, filled with the kind of honesty only illness can bring. Donna placed her hand over Emily's. "Don't let this apartment become your whole life. Promise me that." Emily nodded but didn't speak. Because promises were tricky things. They cost nothing to make, but everything to keep. That evening, after Donna fell asleep to the sound of an old Billie Holiday record, Emily gathered her bag and headed out. On the way down, she paused by the mailboxes. Inside hers sat a letter she didn't want to open. Final notice from the medical billing department. She slipped it into her bag without looking. Outside, the city had changed clothes. The sky wore indigo now, and the streetlights flickered like candlelight over wet sidewalks. Emily turned left on Nostrand Avenue and walked 3 blocks to her second job. Brooklyn Public Library's Flatbush branch was housed in a weathered stone building with a broken security light over the main door. Inside, the children's reading room had been converted into a makeshift ESL space, lit by a single fluorescent bulb and two flickering desk lamps. "You're late," said Jordan, the lanky teenager who acted as her assistant and occasional translator for Arabic speakers. "I brought snacks," Emily replied, lifting a Tupperware of banana bread. They began the lesson with a mother and son from Syria, a father from Senegal, and an elderly woman from Ukraine. Emily didn't just teach English, she taught context. She explained forms, translated idioms, reenacted hospital scenarios, even walked students through job interviews. Tonight, she held up a city bus schedule. "If the sign says limited service, what does that mean?" The Ukrainian woman raised her hand. "Maybe bus is angry?" Everyone laughed. Emily's laughter was the last to fade. For a moment, she forgot about overdue notices and espresso machines. At 10:30 p.m., Emily locked the library door and turned to find David Sterling leaning against the brick wall under the street lamp. He wore a tailored coat, too clean for this block, holding a single manila envelope. "Are you following me now?" she asked, not entirely joking. He stepped forward. "I looked up the nonprofit you mentioned. You translated their entire funding application from Mandarin, Korean, and Russian." "I freelance. You Googled that?" "I also spoke with your last supervisor. Said you once corrected a judge's syntax on an asylum appeal. You didn't even charge for the consultation." Emily crossed her arms. "What do you want, Mr. Sterling?" He held out the envelope. "This is a new draft. We're renegotiating the Shenzhen Connect deal. I want you to take a look. There's something off, but I can't see it." Emily didn't reach for the file. "Hire a firm." "I don't trust them. I trust you." The streetlight buzzed above them like a verdict. Finally, Emily took the envelope and tucked it into her bag. "You still think I'm just a barista?" David shook his head. "No. I think you're the only person in that building who reads between the lines." Then he turned and disappeared into the dark, leaving Emily standing there, letter in one pocket, contract in the other. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure which one would change her life more. Emily sat at the Formica kitchen table the next morning, the manila envelope untouched between her fingers. Her mother was still asleep and the apartment was quiet except for the soft mechanical breath of the portable oxygen machine. She turned the pages slowly, her eyes scanning each clause with a sharp, measured rhythm. There it was again. Subtle, but damning. A clause that misstated the scope of logistics liability under a multi-party transfer agreement. She reached for her pen, scribbled 3 question marks in the margin, and underlined the term dual asset indemnification. It was legalese, but it was wrong. Three hours later, Emily stood in front of the revolving glass doors of Sterling Holdings, her breath catching in her throat not from nerves, but from the bitter January wind. She had called ahead. A woman named Andrea on the 38th floor had booked her a visitor badge. Emily's jeans and heavy coat felt like armor as she stepped into the lobby. The elevator doors opened onto a lounge-like space with abstract art and soft leather seating. David Sterling sat on a gray suede bench, no tie, sleeves rolled, coffee in hand. He stood as she entered. "You found it, didn't you?" he said. Emily pulled the marked-up contract from her tote and handed it to him. "It's not just mistranslated. It's structurally misleading. If you send this version to Shenzhen Connect, their legal team could claim breach the moment a customs delay occurs." David looked down at the notes. "What would you suggest as an alternative?" Emily crossed her arms. "That depends. Do you want clarity or advantage? He tilted his head. Isn't that the same thing? Not in law, and not in life. David smiled faintly. Let's sit. They moved to a small glass meeting table tucked near the window. Sunlight poured in behind Emily, lighting the edges of her curls. She looked tired but grounded, unshakable even here. David tapped the edge of the paper. I want to offer you something, not a job. Not yet. A conversation. Emily raised an eyebrow. With terms? Of course. 3 questions. You ask me anything. If I pass, we talk next steps. You think this is a game? I think you're the only one who can ask the questions that matter. She folded her arms, then, slowly, nodded. All right. First question. When was the last time you told the truth when it cost you something? David's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. He leaned back. 5 years ago, I admitted to my board that I greenlit a risky data partnership with a logistics firm we hadn't vetted. It nearly cost us our public offering. Did anyone get hurt? A few small vendors folded when the tech collapsed. I tried to buy them out, but some were too far gone. Emily nodded. Second question. Do you believe business can be ethical, or do you just want it to look ethical? David exhaled. I believe it can be ethical, but it's hard. Ethics take time. Boards want speed. And you? I'm tired of speed without direction. She considered that. Final question, she said. Why me? David didn't flinch. Because you've already done more with less than most people do with everything. Because you see language as architecture, not ornament. Because my company is bleeding trust, and you don't know how to lie. Emily stared at him for a long moment. The city churned quietly behind the window. Finally, she said, Then here are my terms. If we continue this, I need control over what we build. No puppet seat. I pick my team. I set the messaging. David nodded. You'll have it. And I want access to the community, immigrant groups, students, not just boardrooms. Done. And one more thing. This initiative doesn't carry your name. That caught him off guard. Why? Because truth doesn't need branding. David leaned forward, his smile breaking into something rare. Not charm. Gratitude. Welcome to the fight, Emily. That night, Emily returned to the library, not to teach, but to sit. Jordan found her in the back room, flipping through a dictionary of legal terms in Mandarin. You look like someone just handed you a small country. Emily didn't look up. They handed me a war. He blinked. You gonna win it? She finally smiled. I'm building the army first. Somewhere, back in the towers of Midtown, a printer jammed with the old draft. Emily would never know who cleared it, but she knew what came next. A new page, with her own terms, her own language. And this time she wasn't asking for permission. Emily stood at the front of a long, narrow conference room on the 20th floor of Sterling Holdings. The air smelled like fresh carpet and filtered ambition. A dry erase board behind her was covered in handwriting from an earlier product strategy session. Terms like agile compliance and cost-neutral scalability. None of it mattered now. This was her first official meeting. 6 employees sat at the table. Mid-level managers, legal analysts, and one surprisingly quiet intern with a Stanford sweatshirt. David Sterling had given her the green light to assemble a task force for what they now called the Integrity Project. Her job, audit every major corporate partnership, looking not just for profitability, but for ethical sustainability. No pressure. She took a breath. Thank you all for being here. I know some of you were voluntold, so I'll keep this brief. We're not here to make Sterling Holdings look good. We're here to make it actually be good. If that makes anyone uncomfortable, you're free to leave now. No one moved. Good. We're starting with the Eastport deal. 3 contracts, 2 partners, 1 clause that violates the Equal Procurement Act if you squint hard enough. Logan, can you pull up the 2017 vendor appendix? The older man at the end of the table frowned. That's a 5-year-old contract. We don't audit those retroactively. Emily looked him dead in the eye. We do now. Across the building, David sat alone in his corner office, watching the meeting through a muted video feed. His assistant knocked once before entering. She's pushing harder than legal expected, Andrea said, placing a tablet on his desk. There's pushback. David nodded. Good. If there wasn't, she wouldn't be doing it right. But some of the managers say she's too aggressive. One called her a temp with a mission complex. That temp just saved us from a multi-million-dollar international lawsuit, David said flatly. Let them whine. He leaned back and stared at the skyline. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about stock price. He was thinking about how many contracts he had signed in good faith that might have hidden injustice within them. By the end of the week, Emily had turned a broom closet-sized side room into her war room. The walls were covered in sticky notes. One wall was labeled, Contracts That Harm. Another, Fixable. The third had only one word at the top, Walk Away. Jordan, her young assistant from the library, now worked beside her as a research fellow. He looked up from a spreadsheet. We have a problem. Only one? The Kensington Tech Partnership. They're paying female subcontractors less in 3 South Asian branches. It's buried under a third-party labor clause. Emily's jaw tightened. Mark it. Send it to David. Priority. Jordan hesitated. You sure he'll let it go? That's a huge account. He said truth over branding. Let's see if he meant it. That night, David called her personally. I read your summary. Emily was in the stairwell of her apartment building, away from her mother's room. And? You're right. We end the partnership. I'll handle the press. Emily smiled faintly. That's 1 clause down. Thousands to go. David's voice softened. You still believe we can clean this whole house? Not alone, but I believe fires spread. So can ethics. But the fire would burn back. 1 week later, someone anonymously leaked internal emails to a business blog. The article accused Emily of being an unlicensed legal consultant, unqualified to review contracts. The headline read, Barista turned bulldozer, is Sterling's new ethics chief a liability? Emily stared at the screen, jaw clenched. David stormed into the legal floor an hour later. Who leaked this? Who benefits? Andrea appeared in the doorway. Legal suspects Marcus Whitaker, old school board member. Thought hiring her was reckless. David looked out the window. Then let's be reckless. Let's be unstoppable. He picked up his phone. Get me a press conference. She speaks, not me. The next day, Emily stood in front of a podium, shaking slightly as the cameras clicked. David stood beside her but said nothing. Yes, I made coffee for this company. Yes, I filed grants from a public library computer, but I also read between the lines. Lines that should have protected workers, not crushed them. I don't have a JD, but I do have eyes. And if you think justice belongs only to the certified, then you've already lost. Silence. Then applause, quiet, then louder. That night, they updated the Sterling Holdings website. Under leadership, beside David's name, now appeared hers. Emily Carter, Director of Corporate Ethics and Human Impact. And so, the ethics clause became not just a document term. It became a person. The rain came softly that morning, like punctuation after a long sentence. Emily stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the legal commons, watching it streak down the glass in gentle, uneven lines. Behind her, the fellowship room buzzed with quiet energy. Archived cases, fresh debates, laughter over terrible coffee. And then, David Sterling arrived. He didn't call. He didn't send a meeting request. He just walked in. His presence still carried weight, even now that Emily had become the soul of the place. He stood in the doorway, rainwater soaking the cuffs of his coat. "Can I borrow 5 minutes?" Emily smiled faintly. "You already took 2. Sit down." He sat across from her in the small conference room she often used for check-ins with the fellows. It smelled faintly of old folders and lemon cleaner. "I've been reviewing succession plans," he said. "It's time." Emily tilted her head. "You're retiring?" David shook his head. "Not yet. But I'm stepping back. Boards don't need rulers, they need architects. And I've already built my cathedral." Emily folded her arms. "And let me guess, you want me to be the next bishop?" He chuckled. "No. I want you to be the new blueprint." He slid an envelope across the table. Inside, a formal letter naming her the incoming chair of the Sterling Holdings Ethical Council, an independent body with policy-shaping authority. And something else, an unsigned letter, blank space where a signature should be. David nodded toward it. "That's not a contract. That's a commitment. Only sign it if you're ready to become the person you keep pushing the rest of us to be." Emily stared at it for a long time, then closed the folder. "I need to think." That night, she walked back through Harlem, letting the rain fall over her coat, her hair, her questions. She passed the library where she first printed a contract, the cafe where she used to teach English, the hospital where her mother once whispered, "Don't let them silence you." At home, she brewed chamomile tea, sat in silence, no laptop, no headlines, just breath. The next morning, she returned to the Commons, waited until the fellows had arrived, then pulled Sophia aside. "I need your help," Emily said. "Me?" "I want you to help design the onboarding for new fellows. I want your voice in the room when we draft our future." Sophia blinked, then grinned. "You mean like a real job?" "I mean legacy." The announcement came 2 weeks later. Sterling Holdings had appointed its first ever ethical council chair. The press release quoted David, but the headline wasn't about him. It was about her. Emily Carter, named chair, bringing community-led reform to corporate law. But Emily didn't read the headlines. She was too busy. The archive project had grown. The Commons was expanding to a second city. Carter Fellows were consulting for nonprofits, housing boards, immigrant support centers. They were changing policy, clause by clause, word by word. On her first day in the new role, Emily arrived not in a black car, but on the subway. She wore a navy blazer over her old hoodie, a nod to who she was, who she remained. She didn't bring a speech. She brought a folder of stories, tenant victories, immigration reversals, custody restorations, real names, real lives. "I'm not here to lecture," she said. "I'm here to remind you. Contracts are not cages. They're conversations. They're promises with consequences. Let's speak clearly." The room stood, applauded, not because she was powerful, but because she had used her power to make others visible. That night, Emily sat on her stoop in Harlem with Sophia and a few of the fellows. They passed around tacos, argued over whose case summary was the most ridiculous. "You still sign things with that green pen?" Sophia teased. Emily smiled. "Always. Even on billion-dollar agreements? Especially on those." Above them, the stars pressed against the sky like quiet signatures. No ink, no claws. Just light. Just promise. Just a legacy. Rewritten, line by line, by a girl who once asked why contracts hurt so much, and decided instead to make them heal.